Macallan, 25. Neat. No ice. Alexander Barrett didn't look up as he issued the command. The lounge attendant, Carmen, according to her name tag, nodded with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the cocktail napkin. She was invisible to him, just another amenity included in his Diamond Elite membership. The Diamond Lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was Alexander's natural habitat. A carefully curated ecosystem of muted tones, polished chrome, and the gentle clinking of ice in expensive whiskey. For Alexander, Executive VP of Acquisitions at Monarch Global Ventures, this wasn't a luxury. It was baseline, expected, deserved. It was a fortress against the teeming, chaotic masses, shuffling through the main concourse below a world of crying babies, fast food wrappers, and the indignity of waiting in line. He settled into a plush leather armchair, placing his gleaming Italian calfskin briefcase beside him with a proprietary pat. The briefcase, a $22,000 Bottega Veneta, was new, a gift to himself, for closing the Davidson merger last quarter. The leather still smelled of money and validation. It sat beside him like an obedient pet, its presence announcing his station to anyone with the education to recognize it. Alexander was a man sculpted by entitlement. His suit was a bespoke Brioni that had required 3 fittings, $7,000, of immaculate tailoring that draped perfectly across his tall frame. His watch, an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, with a blue dial, peeked out precisely half an inch from his French cuff. The sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face was the product of a lifetime spent looking down on others. Carmen returned with his scotch, placing it on the side table with a fresh napkin. The amber liquid caught the light, throwing honeyed reflections onto the polished mahogany. "Anything else, Mr. Barrett?" He answered with a flick of his wrist dismissal, without acknowledgement. He was en route to San Francisco for the deal of his career, a multi-billion-dollar partnership with Lumina Innovations, a revolutionary tech firm specializing in ethical AI and quantum computing solutions. Sealing this deal would catapult him to the C-suite. Failure was not an option. His attention was already glued to his phone. He was loudly closing a secondary deal, his voice a theatrical boom designed to be overheard. "Listen, Mark, just make it happen," he blustered, crossing one leg over the other. "The valuation is soft. Squeeze them. If they balk, we walk. It's that simple. We're the prize here. Don't ever forget that." He hung up with a triumphant sigh, taking a sweeping, judgmental gaze around the lounge. His eyes, cold and assessing, scanned the other occupants, a tech entrepreneur he recognized from a CNBC segment, a senator's aide identifiable by her strained smile and performative busyness. These were his people. Then his gaze landed on her. She was sitting in a secluded corner, curled up in an armchair that seemed to swallow her petite frame. She was a black woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with close-cropped natural hair, adorned with a few subtle silver clips. But it wasn't her race that initially snagged Alexander's critical attention. It was her attire. She was wearing a simple heather gray athleisure set, a Lululemon zip-up, and matching joggers. On her feet were a pair of pristine white Nike Air Max sneakers. She was reading a scientific journal, a pair of tortoiseshell reading glasses perched on her nose, occasionally making notes on a tablet with an Apple Pencil. To Alexander, she was an anomaly, a glitch in the carefully coded matrix of the VIP lounge. His mind, a finely tuned engine of prejudice, began its calculations. Guest pass, he wondered. Did her boyfriend buy her a first-class ticket as a treat? Maybe she works for some celebrity. The idea that she belonged there on her own merit simply didn't compute. Who let her in here? And wearing that, in his diamond lounge. He watched as she got up to refill her glass of water. She moved with an unhurried, quiet grace that somehow annoyed him even more than her presence. Her movements were precise, deliberate, as if she was conserving energy for something more important than performing status. As she passed his chair, her sleeve brushed against his briefcase. She didn't notice, lost in her own world, but Alexander noticed. He flinched. His nostrils flared. His jaw tightened. His hand gripped his tumbler of Macallan with sudden force, the crystal edge biting into his palm. The woman continued to the water station, filled her glass, and added a slice of lemon with small metal tongs. The ice cubes clinked against the glass like tiny chimes. She moved without hurry, without apology, without the nervous energy of someone who didn't belong. It infuriated him. Alexander cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The woman paused and turned her expression neutral. She took out wireless earbuds he hadn't noticed before. "I'm sorry." Her voice was soft but clear, her tone polite but not deferential. "Your sleeve," he said, gesturing with a flick of his wrist toward his briefcase. "This is Italian calfskin. It scratches." The woman's eyes drifted from his face to the briefcase, then back. A flicker of something amusement assessment passed through her gaze, before being replaced by that same calm neutrality. "My apologies," she said. She gave a slight nod and turned to walk away. For Alexander, this wasn't enough. The perceived slight, her casual attire, her very presence. It was a tear in the fabric of his world. The fortress had been breached, and he, Alexander Barrett, was going to be the one to restore order. He watched her return to her seat, resume her reading, make another note on her tablet. Her ease made him uneasy. Her comfort made him uncomfortable. She didn't look like money. At least not his kind of money. The kind that announced itself with logos and labels and limited editions. If she had wealth, it was the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need to perform. Or more likely, she was just another diversity initiative beneficiary who had lucked into access she hadn't earned. Either way, she didn't belong in his world, and he was about to let her know it. Alexander flagged down the lounge manager, a polished man named James Rivera, who had the pained smile of someone paid to absorb the indignities of the ultra-wealthy. James's left eye twitched slightly whenever he was uncomfortable, a tell Alexander had noticed in their previous interactions. "James," Alexander began, his voice low but carrying. "I have to say I'm a little disappointed." James's smile tightened. His left eye twitched. His fingers absently adjusted his name tag. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Barrett. Is there anything I can do?" Alexander gestured discreetly with his chin toward the woman who was now settling back into her seat. "I think the standards here are beginning to slip," he said, loud enough for her and several others to hear. "This is supposed to be an exclusive space for paying members and first-class passengers, not a public waiting area. One expects a certain decorum." James's eyes darted nervously toward the woman. He knew exactly who she was, but his training was to de-escalate, not to correct a high-value client like Alexander Barrett. "I can assure you, sir, all guests here meet the entry requirements," James murmured, diplomatically, fingers fidgeting with his cufflinks. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. Alexander scoffed. "Requirements are one thing. Maintaining an atmosphere is another. I pay a significant annual fee for this card. I expect a certain caliber of clientele, not people who look like they're about to go for a jog in the park." The insult, no longer veiled, hung in the air. The hushed conversations around them faltered. The tech entrepreneur looked up from his iPad. The senator's aide peered over her laptop. They were watching the show. The woman in the athleisure set slowly lowered her journal. She didn't look angry. She didn't look humiliated. She looked analytical. Her dark, intelligent eyes met Alexander's, and she held his gaze, her silence more potent than any retort. "Look," Alexander huffed, adopting the tone of a man explaining a complex concept to a simple child. "It's nothing personal. It's just about brand integrity. American Express and Delta work very hard to cultivate a premium experience. When that experience is diluted, it affects all of us." The woman finally spoke, her voice still quiet, yet it cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel. "And what part of my experience is diluting yours?" she inquired, head tilted slightly. She wasn't being defensive. It was a genuine question, as if she were a scientist studying a strange and illogical specimen. The directness of her question momentarily threw Alexander off his rhythm. He had expected shame, anger, or at the very least, an embarrassed retreat. He hadn't expected calm, analytical inquiry. "It's the presentation," he stammered, recovering. "It's about respect. Respect for the establishment. Respect for the other patrons. When you're in a place like this, you dress the part, a suit, a blazer, a dress. Not loungewear." He said the word loungewear, as if it were a foul substance on his tongue. I see the woman set her gaze unwavering. "So your comfort is contingent on my wardrobe. My comfort is contingent on the agreed-upon standards of a civilized environment." He snapped, his voice rising. The pretense of civility was beginning to fray. "People like you just don't get it. You think you can just wander into any space and make it your own. There are rules. There are levels. This lounge is for people who have worked hard, who have achieved something. It's a reward. It's not a handout." The coded language was now overt. "People like you." The poison was out. It wasn't just about the athleisure set anymore. It was about her face, her hair, her very existence in a space he considered his own. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. The senator's aide hid behind her laptop. The tech entrepreneur, however, watched with a predatory stillness, as if observing a market fluctuation. This was a power play, and he was curious to see who would win. Mr. Barrett James started eye-twitching frantically now. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "No," James Alexander interrupted, holding up a hand. "This needs to be said. If the staff won't enforce a basic dress code, then the members must police it ourselves." He turned back to the woman. "I'm flying to the coast for a meeting that will close a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. I came here to prepare to be in an environment of like-minded professionals. How am I supposed to focus with this casual Friday atmosphere you're projecting?" The woman slowly closed her journal, marking her page with a thin leather bookmark. She placed it deliberately on the small table beside her. Every movement was precise, unhurried, radiating a sense of control that was the polar opposite of Alexander's flustered aggression. "My apologies for disrupting your vital preparations," she said, a faint, almost imperceptible note of irony in her tone. "It was not my intention to devalue your premium experience with my loungewear." Her calm was infuriating. Her composure made him feel unhinged by comparison. He wanted her to yell, to cry, to storm out, to confirm his narrative that she didn't belong. Instead, she remained perfectly, maddeningly composed. She stood up. For a moment, Alexander thought she was leaving, that he had won. He puffed out his chest. But she didn't walk toward the exit. Instead, she walked toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. She stood there for a moment, hands clasped behind her back, looking out at the ballet of planes, taxiing, taking off, and landing. The lounge PA system chimed softly. "Now boarding Delta Flight 1782 to San Francisco at Gate B42. First-class passengers are now invited to board." Alexander smirked. That was his flight. He stood, retrieved his briefcase, and shot a final smug look at the woman's back. He then gave a curt nod to James, whose eye was still twitching nervously. "See to it that things are handled better in the future," he commanded, as he began to walk toward the exit, feeling victorious. A different staff member, a woman in a sharp, dark blue uniform he didn't recognize, approached the woman at the window. The staff member spoke in a low, respectful tone that was entirely different from the one used for the general lounge guests. Dr. Patterson, the staffer, said, "Your aircraft is ready. The crew has completed their pre-flight checks. We can escort you to the jet bridge whenever you're prepared." Alexander stopped dead in his tracks. His triumphant stride faltered. "Dr. Patterson, your aircraft." The woman. Dr. Patterson turned from the window. She gave the staffer a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you, Elena. I'm ready now." She picked up her small carry-on bag and her journal. As she walked toward a discreet unmarked door at the far end of the lounge, a door Alexander had always assumed was for staff. Only, her path crossed his once more. She paused. She looked directly at him. The neutrality in her eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound, pitying disappointment. 10 seconds of silence. Not a word. Just that look. The lounge seemed to freeze around them. The ambient noise faded. All that existed was her gaze measuring, weighing, finding him wanting. Then, "You know," she said, her voice still quiet, but now resonating with an authority that chilled him to the bone. The funny thing about assumptions, Mr. Barrett, is that they often reveal far more about the person making them than the person they are about. She didn't wait for a response. She simply followed the staff member Elena through the unmarked door. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Alexander Barrett standing in the middle of the Diamond Lounge, the silent stares of the other passengers burning into his back. He glanced at his own boarding pass for first class. Then he looked at the door she had disappeared through. That wasn't the way to the commercial jet bridge. That was the private access. The access for people who didn't fly first class because they flew on a different class of vehicle entirely. The Macallan 25 turned to acid in his stomach. His multi-billion-dollar deal was in Silicon Valley. Lumina Innovations, a company known for its reclusive visionary founder, a founder known only by their initial and last name, Dr. M. Patterson. The color drained from Alexander Barrett's face. His $22,000 briefcase slipped from his fingers. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. No one offered to pick it up. Behind the bar, Carmen's lips curved into the first genuine smile of her shift. Alexander Barrett boarded his flight in a daze, his body on autopilot, while his mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. The flight attendant greeted him warmly at the cabin door. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Barrett. May I show you to your seat?" He nodded mechanically, following her to his first-class pod 2A. Was this really happening? Had he just insulted? No, impossible. Had to be another Dr. Patterson. The familiar comfort of the first-class cabin, the wide leather seats, the pre-departure champagne, the hot towel service, all of it felt hollow now. The amenities that had once reaffirmed his status now seemed like cheap consolation prizes compared to the private jet access he had just witnessed. As he settled into his seat, the gravity of his potential mistake began to sink in. Dr. Patterson. Could it really be her? The reclusive founder of Lumina Innovations, number impossible. Patterson was a common name, and even if it was her, surely she wouldn't hold a trivial airport encounter against a deal worth billions. Would she? Sweat beaded on his forehead. His collar suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. The champagne flute trembled in his hand, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He set it down before he could spill it, leaving a ring of condensation on the tray table. "Sir, are you feeling well?" The flight attendant's concerned voice barely penetrated his panic. "You look a bit pale." He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the magnitude of what might have just happened. The plane's air conditioning seemed suddenly inadequate. The cabin too small, too close. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just work stress." A hot flash of shame rose from his collar as the memory of his words replayed in his mind. "People like you just don't get it." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, acrid and lingering. He flagged down a flight attendant. "Double scotch, please. No ice." The drink arrived promptly, and he drained half of it in one swallow, hoping the alcohol would dull the anxiety now gnawing at his insides. It didn't. The burn in his throat only amplified his discomfort. Alexander had always prided himself on reading people, on sizing them up, instantly categorizing them, determining their worth to him in a matter of seconds. It was a skill that had served him well in business, allowing him to dismiss or pursue connections with ruthless efficiency. But what if just this once he had catastrophically misread someone? He closed his eyes, and unbidden memories flooded back. 3 years earlier at the Four Seasons in Hong Kong, he had complained loudly about being seated next to the help when a young South Asian man in a simple button-down had been placed at his table during a crowded lunch service. The man had eaten quietly, then left only for Alexander to discover later that he was Vikram Patel, the 29-year-old tech prodigy whose startup had just been acquired for $2 billion. 2 years ago, at the Goldman conference in Miami, he had brushed off a Latina woman trying to engage him in conversation about market trends, assuming she was part of the catering staff. She turned out to be Maria Gonzalez, the newly appointed head of emerging markets for J.P. Morgan. Last year, in the elevator of his own office building, he had asked a young black man in a hoodie if he was delivering something, only to watch with horror as the man exited on the executive floor and was greeted as Dr. Jackson by the CEO's assistant. Each time he had rationalized, made excuses, convinced himself the fault lay with them for not presenting themselves properly, for not conforming to his narrow conception of what power and success should look like. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Was he really so blind, so consistently wrong, so fundamentally flawed in his judgments? The plane taxied and took off the thrust of the engines, pushing him back into his seat. But the real pressure was coming from within, the crushing weight of the realization that he might have just sabotaged the most important deal of his career before it even began. At 35,000 feet, the Wi-Fi logo on the screen in front of Alexander lit up. He immediately connected, paying the exorbitant $40 fee without a second thought. He needed to know. He needed to confirm his fears, or hopefully dispel them. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Did he really want to know? Would ignorance be better, at least for the next 5 hours? No. He had to face this. He typed Dr. M. Patterson, Lumina Innovations into the search bar. The results loaded with excruciating slowness, each pixel materializing like a death sentence. And there she was. The first image was from a Forbes cover story, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Maya Patterson is Rewriting the Rules of Tech." The photo showed the same woman from the lounge. Her hair was styled the same way, but in the photo she wasn't wearing athleisure. She was in a sharp, elegant blazer, standing in front of a sprawling, futuristic campus. Her expression was calm, confident, and utterly brilliant. Her eyes, the same analytical eyes that had dissected him in the lounge, stared out from the screen. The phone slipped from his fingers. It clattered onto the tray table. His lungs seized. The cabin tilted around him. Sir, are you all right?" The flight attendant's voice sounded far away underwater. He couldn't answer, couldn't form words, could only stare at the image on his screen. It was her, Dr. Maya Patterson, founder and CEO of Lumina Innovations. The woman whose company he was flying across the country to court. The woman he had just treated like an unwelcome intruder in his space. He scrolled frantically through the article. Dr. Maya Patterson, 38, PhD in quantum computing from MIT at 22. Turned down offers from Google and Apple to found Lumina Innovations. Built the company from a garage startup to a $47 billion valuation in under a decade. Known for her revolutionary approaches to ethical AI development and quantum blockchain security. Known also, the article noted for her unassuming personal style, her preference for comfort over flash, and her absolute uncompromising commitment to integrity in all business dealings. There was a quote from her highlighted in a call-out box. "Character is the operating system of our society. We can teach skills, but we can't teach integrity. We partner with people who share our fundamental values, or we don't partner at all." The words blurred before his eyes, each one a nail in the coffin of his career. Character, integrity, values. The very currencies he had devalued throughout his professional life. He was a dead man walking. He had not just insulted a fellow passenger, he had insulted the very person who held the fate of his company and his entire career in her hands. He had stood in the hallowed halls of privilege and demonstrated with explosive clarity that he possessed none of the values she held most dear. He had mistaken her quiet humility for weakness, her understated attire for a lack of status. In his attempt to police the boundaries of his world, he had revealed himself to be nothing more than a shallow, prejudiced fool. Alexander scrolled through more photos. Dr. Patterson accepting the Turing Award in an elegant evening gown. Dr. Patterson speaking at the World Economic Forum in a tailored suit. And yes, Dr. Patterson boarding her private jet in the caption confirmed her trademark travel uniform of premium athleisure wear. Practical, comfortable, unpretentious. The very outfit he had mocked her for wearing. "Sir, would you care for dinner?" The flight attendant's voice broke through his spiral of panic. "We have seared salmon or beef tenderloin tonight." "Nothing." "Thank you," he managed to croak out. The smell of food wafting through the cabin turned his stomach, bile rising in his throat. The thought of eating made him nauseous. He returned to his phone, searching desperately for a way out of this nightmare. Perhaps there was another Dr. Patterson. Perhaps she had a twin. Perhaps this was all an elaborate coincidence, but the evidence was undeniable. He had insulted deliberately, publicly. Insulted the woman whose approval he needed more than anyone else's in the world right now. Is this salvageable, he wondered. Could I apologize? Explain. Make amends. The mental image of her eyes, those calm, assessing eyes that had looked at him with such disappointment, told him the answer. Some bells couldn't be unrung. The flight to San Francisco was a 5-hour descent into his own personal hell. Every announcement from the captain, every cheerful offer from the flight attendants grated on his raw nerves. He replayed the scene in the lounge over and over, each viewing more horrific than the last. His own words echoed in his ears, venomous and stupid. "People like you. Standards are slipping. Respect for the establishment." He had lectured Dr. Maya Patterson, a woman who had built her own establishment from scratch on respect. The arrogance was so profound, it was almost comical. Almost. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above the same American landscape, Dr. Maya Patterson was in her own world. The cabin of her Gulfstream G700 was a sanctuary of quiet efficiency. The soft cream leather of her seat, the warm glow of the polished wood paneling, the silent, attentive service of her 2-person crew. It was all designed for one purpose, to maximize her time and minimize her stress. The scent of jasmine tea wafted through the cabin. The low hum of the engines provided a perfect white noise backdrop. Outside the window, the sun painted the clouds in gold and crimson. She had already changed out of her travel attire into a crisply pressed silk blouse and tailored slacks ready for her arrival. She wasn't thinking about Alexander Barrett. Or rather, she wasn't dwelling on him. The encounter had been cataloged, analyzed, and filed away. It was a data point, another unfortunate but useful confirmation of the biases she navigated every day. The anger she might have once felt at such encounters had long ago been transmuted into something far more powerful: resolve. Another tea, Dr. Patterson asked Olivia Taylor, her 29-year-old chief of staff. Olivia's quick bird-like movements and perpetual half-smile contrasted with Maya's measured stillness. "Please. The lemongrass if we have it." Olivia nodded and moved toward the galley. At 29, with a sharp bob of blonde hair and keen blue eyes, Olivia had been with Maya for 5 years, rising from executive assistant to become her most trusted advisor. She had witnessed firsthand the challenges Maya faced as a black woman in tech leadership. "So that man in the lounge," Olivia began, as she returned with the tea, the words tumbling out in her characteristic rapid-fire delivery. "Was he really from Monarch, the acquisition guy? The same one who, did he even unbelievable?" Maya nodded, accepting the steaming cup. "Alexander Barrett, Executive VP of Acquisitions, the one who's leading their partnership proposal." Olivia's eyes widened. "Did he not know who you were?" "How could he not? Your Forbes cover was just, evidently not." Maya's tone was matter-of-fact without bitterness. "What a disaster." Olivia winced, drumming her fingers on the armrest. "For him, total career implosion in what, 5 minutes?" 10. Maya took a sip of her tea before responding. It was illuminating. 15 years earlier, when Maya was a 23-year-old PhD student presenting her groundbreaking quantum algorithm at MIT, a senior professor had asked her if she was in the right room and suggested she might be looking for the diversity scholarship meeting down the hall. She had shown her conference badge and proceeded to deliver a presentation that would later be described as paradigm-shifting. 10 years ago, as she sought seed funding for Lumina, a venture capitalist had asked if her boss would be joining the meeting, unable to conceive that she was in fact the founder and CEO. 5 years ago, at a major industry conference, she had been directed to the spouse lounge instead of the speaker's green room, despite wearing her speaker badge. Each time she had remained composed, had refused to give the offenders the emotional reaction they expected from her. She had learned early that displaying anger, however justified, would only feed into stereotypes about angry black women. So she had channeled that energy into building something undeniable, a company so revolutionary, so successful, that her presence at the table could never again be questioned. "The proposal is actually quite good," Maya said, turning her attention to the dossier in front of her. It was the complete outline from Monarch Global Ventures. Pages and pages of financial projections, market analyses, and strategic outlines. The synergies were obvious. The potential for growth was immense. Alexander Barrett's team had done their homework. But Olivia prompted, knowing her boss well enough to hear the unspoken reservation. Maya looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. "But I meant what I told Forbes. Character is the operating system of our company. We've turned down partnerships with better numbers because the people involved didn't share our values." She highlighted a section on AI ethics compliance and made a note in the margin. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating risk, mapping out implementation strategies. The deal was good. The numbers worked. The man who spearheaded this meticulous, impressive proposal, she continued, is the same man who flinched when my sleeve brushed his briefcase. The same man who tried to have me thrown out of a lounge because I didn't fit his narrow, prejudiced view of what success looks like. She closed the file with a decisive snap. He would be the primary liaison on this partnership. Our teams would have to work with him, travel with him, build a future with him. And you don't think he's the right fit, Olivia concluded. Maya set down her teacup, a rare moment of hesitation crossing her features. Am I being too harsh? Too unforgiving? Olivia paused, surprised by the question. In 5 years, she'd rarely seen Maya second-guess herself. You've always said decisions should be based on data, not emotion, she offered carefully. What does the data tell you about this man? The data tells me he's a liability, Maya said softly. But data doesn't capture everything. There's a human cost here too, to rejecting him or to accepting him. Both. Maya sat in silence for a long moment, simply staring out the window. Olivia waited, respecting the quiet. Finally, Maya spoke again. Some currencies are non-negotiable. Character is one of them. Would Dr. Harris agree? Olivia asked, referencing Maya's former mentor, a man who had believed in second chances. A small smile touched Maya's lips. Richard would tell me I'm being stubborn, that everyone deserves an opportunity to grow. And your response? That growth requires fertilizer, not partnership. Maya said, her resolve returning. Let Monarch deal with his prejudice. Lumina doesn't need to underwrite it. The choice she had to make was no longer just about numbers on a page. The data point from the lounge had changed the entire equation. Alexander Barrett was flying toward what he thought was the pinnacle of his career. In reality, he was flying toward a reckoning he couldn't even begin to imagine. And Maya Patterson, the woman he had so casually dismissed, was flying toward a decision that would define the future of both their companies. The California coast came into view as both aircraft began their descent, one following commercial airways into SFO, the other taking a more direct approach to a private airfield in Palo Alto. Two vessels bearing two leaders, now connected by a fateful encounter, arriving for what should have been a routine business meeting, but had transformed into something far more consequential. Alexander Barrett had not slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his complexion ashen. He had spent the flight alternating between frantic research on Dr. Patterson and increasingly desperate attempts to formulate a strategy. Should he acknowledge the encounter immediately? Pretend it never happened? Offer a profuse apology? Resign on the spot? None of the options seemed likely to salvage the situation. As the plane touched down with a jolt, Alexander gripped the armrests. This wasn't just another landing. It felt like Judgment Day. We've arrived at San Francisco International Airport, the captain announced. Local time is 7:42 p.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 68 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying with us today. Pleasant. The word seemed like a cruel joke. The cabin filled with the cacophony of seatbelts, unbuckling overhead bins opening passengers collecting belongings. Alexander remained frozen in his seat, unwilling to join the exodus. Sir, we've arrived, the flight attendant prompted gently. Do you need assistance with your bags? He shook his head mechanically, gathering his possessions. His once prized briefcase now felt like an albatross. The leather seemed to mock him, reminding him of his own misplaced arrogance. Alexander collected himself and deplaned in a fog of anxiety. He moved through the terminal like a ghost, barely registering the luxury car service representative, holding a sign with his name. Mr. Barrett. I'm Derek. I'll be taking you to the Rosewood Sand Hill this evening. The drive to Menlo Park was a blur of twinkling lights and coastal fog. The Rosewood Sand Hill was the preferred luxury accommodation for Silicon Valley elite, a place where venture capital deals were made over $200 breakfasts, and tech moguls lounged by the infinity pool, plotting the next disruption. Tonight its opulence was wasted on Alexander. The immaculate suite with its panoramic views of the Santa Cruz Mountains, the welcome bottle of Dom Perignon, the fruit basket artfully arranged by the housekeeping staff. All of it seemed like the last meal of a condemned man. The sheets felt like sandpaper against his skin. The pillow might as well have been stone. The minibar's clink of bottles sounded like funeral bells. He placed his briefcase on the mahogany luggage stand and stared at it. The brass clasps gleamed in the soft lighting, a metallic sneer at his predicament. $22,000 of handcrafted leather that had seemed so important this morning now looked like what it was, a ridiculously expensive container used to carry a few documents and a laptop. Meanwhile, at a private airfield 15 miles away, the Gulfstream G700 touched down with barely a whisper. As the jet taxied to a stop, a sleek black Tesla Model X was already waiting on the tarmac. Maya descended the aircraft stairs, Olivia a step behind her. A tall man in a well-cut suit stepped forward from beside the Tesla. "Dr. Patterson, welcome back." "How was New York?" Marcus asked, his baritone carrying across the tarmac. "Instructive as always." "Marcus," she replied with a small smile. "Are we still on for the 8 a.m. walkthrough before the Monarch meeting?" "Everything's set," Marcus confirmed, opening the car door. "The team will be ready." The Tesla pulled away from the airfield, heading not to a hotel, but directly to the Lumina Innovations campus. Unlike many tech executives who maintained lavish mansions in Atherton or Los Altos Hills, Maya lived in a modest but elegant apartment on the top floor of the main Lumina building, a choice that eliminated her commute and kept her connected to the pulse of her company. "Will you be reviewing the Monarch proposal tonight?" Olivia asked, as they drove, fingers tapping a rapid rhythm on her tablet. Maya gazed out at the darkened landscape of Silicon Valley, once orchards and farmland, now the epicenter of the digital revolution. "No," she said after a moment. "I've seen enough. Tomorrow will be about observing, not reviewing." She turned to Olivia. "Make sure the entire leadership team is present for the meeting. I want everyone to witness this firsthand." "Is that necessary?" Olivia asked carefully. "Wouldn't it be easier to just cancel? Send an email, ghost him. I could arrange." "Easier." "Yes," Maya acknowledged. "But this isn't about easy. This is about clarity, about demonstrating what we stand for as a company." The Tesla turned into the Lumina campus, a series of low-slung structures nestled among redwoods and native landscaping. Unlike the ostentatious headquarters of other tech giants, the Lumina buildings blended with the landscape, their surfaces of reclaimed wood and smart glass reflecting Maya's philosophy that technology should enhance the natural world, not dominate it. As they pulled up to the main entrance, Maya looked out at the campus she had built from nothing. The weight of the decision before her felt momentarily heavy. A partnership with Monarch would accelerate Lumina's growth, open new markets, create value for shareholders. But at what cost? "Their numbers are good," she said almost to herself. "Their strategy is sound. But tomorrow isn't about numbers or strategy. It's about character." Olivia finished for her. Maya nodded. "Always has been." The Tesla's door opened silently. She stepped out into the crisp night air. Tomorrow would settle accounts. The headquarters of Lumina Innovations wasn't a building. It was a statement. It didn't tower over the landscape in an arrogant display of corporate might. Instead, it integrated with it. Low-slung structures of reclaimed wood, polished concrete, and vast panes of smart glass were nestled among groves of mature redwood and live oak trees. A creek diverted and restored babbled through the center of the campus. It was less of a corporate park and more of a national park with fiber optic cable. It projected exactly what Maya Patterson intended: harmony between nature and technology, and a quiet, unshakable confidence that had no need for ostentatious displays. Alexander Barrett arrived in a black town car, his stomach a knot of dread. He had spent the night in his suite at the Rosewood, trying to rehearse his presentation, but his own words from the lounge kept interrupting, mocking him. He had convinced himself through a desperate feat of mental gymnastics that he could still salvage this. Perhaps she wouldn't make the connection. Maybe she was a different M. Patterson. Or maybe, just maybe, she was a professional who would overlook a minor personal misunderstanding for the sake of a mutually beneficial multi-billion-dollar deal. This was business after all. Feelings didn't have a place on a balance sheet. Right. But what if he was wrong? What if this was the end of everything? He straightened his tie. Hermes, $260, smoothed his suit. Tom Ford, $4, $950, and pasted on his best corporate smile. He was Alexander Barrett, Executive VP of Acquisitions. He was a shark. He just needed to get back in the water. He was met in the lobby not by a receptionist behind a desk, but by a young whip-smart campus ambassador named Diego Morales, who offered him a bottle of water, still or sparkling, sourced from a local spring, and began the tour. "Welcome to Lumina, Mr. Barrett." "Qué bueno tenerle aquí," Diego greeted with a grin that seemed to take up half his face. "I understand this is your first visit to campus." "Yes," Alexander confirmed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I've been looking forward to it. We're excited to have you here," Diego said with genuine enthusiasm, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet as he walked. "Let me show you around before your meeting. Our campus is designed around 4 core principles: sustainability, wellness, collaboration, and innovation. It's totally amazing, you'll see." The inside of Lumina was even more impressive than the outside. Natural light flooded every space. Teams of engineers huddled in open-plan collaboration pods, scribbling on glass walls. There were no corner offices, only shared spaces. The atmosphere was one of intense, focused energy, but it was calm, devoid of the frantic, aggressive hustle that characterized his own offices back in New York. It was civilized. The irony was not lost on him. "Our entire campus is carbon neutral," Diego explained as they walked occasionally, pausing mid-sentence to greet passing colleagues by name. His unruly black hair bounced with each animated gesture. "The solar array on the roof generates 82% of our power needs, and we purchase the remainder from renewable sources. The building itself is made from 70% recycled or reclaimed materials." "Es increíble, ¿verdad?" Alexander nodded, trying to focus on Diego's words, but his eyes kept scanning for Dr. Patterson. Each passing woman made his heart rate spike. Would she confront him immediately? Have him thrown out? The uncertainty was excruciating. His first 2 meetings were with the heads of engineering and strategic partnerships. They were sharp, incisive, and deeply knowledgeable. They grilled him on every aspect of the proposal his team had prepared. To his credit, Alexander knew his stuff. He parried their questions with data-backed answers, articulating the value proposition with the smooth, practiced ease of a man who had closed 100 deals. He started to feel a flicker of his old confidence return. They seemed impressed. The numbers were undeniable. The logic was sound. He was winning them over. Was it possible? Could the encounter in the lounge really be forgotten? "This is all very impressive," Mr. Barrett said. "The head of strategy, a woman named Anna Sharma. Your team has put together one of the most thorough proposals we've seen. The financial models are robust." "Thank you," Alexander said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "We at Monarch Global believe in thoroughness. We believe this partnership could redefine the industry. We agree on the potential." Anna said, her expression becoming more serious. "Which is why the final sign-off always rests with Dr. Patterson. She's waiting for you in the main boardroom. Diego will show you the way." This was it. The final boss. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. He followed Diego down a long, glass-walled corridor that overlooked a tranquil Japanese garden. His mind raced. How do I play this? Do I apologize immediately? Do I pretend it never happened? He decided on the latter. Acknowledging it would be an admission of guilt. Pretending it didn't happen projected confidence, a belief that the incident was too trivial to mention. He would be all business professional. He would let the deal speak for itself. They arrived at a set of towering doors made from a single slab of reclaimed redwood. Diego pushed one open and gestured for him to enter. "Mr. Barrett is here to see you. Dr. Patterson." Diego announced his usual animation, giving way to a formal deference. The boardroom was vast and minimalist. One long table made from the same redwood as the doors sat in the center. At the far end of the room, a wall of glass offered a panoramic view of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And sitting at the head of the table alone was Dr. Maya Patterson. She was no longer in athleisure wear or a silk blouse. She was wearing a simple, impeccably tailored black dress. No jewelry, save for a plain, elegant watch. Her hair was styled as it had been in the lounge. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a tablet in front of her, her expression unreadable. Alexander's throat went dry. The entire room seemed to suck the air from his lungs. It was her. There was no doubt. He walked slowly, his expensive Italian shoes making no sound on the polished concrete floor. The walk from the door to the table felt like a mile. He felt like a prisoner on his way to his own execution. He reached the table and stood waiting for her to acknowledge him. The silence stretched for an agonizingly long time. He could hear his own blood pounding in his ears. Finally, without looking up from her tablet, she spoke. Her voice was the same quiet, controlled tone from the lounge. "Please sit down, Mr. Barrett." Alexander sat. The chair felt cold. Dr. Patterson continued to study her tablet for another 30 seconds. Each second was a fresh turn of the screw for Alexander. Then she slowly lifted her head, and her eyes, those calm, analytical, all-seeing eyes, met his. There was no anger in them, no gloating. There was something far worse, a profound clinical disinterest. "I have read your proposal," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty room. "I've read it 4 times. From a purely financial and strategic standpoint, it is excellent. Your team is to be commended." A tiny, insane flicker of hope ignited in Alexander's chest. She's a professional. She's going to separate the business from the personal. However, she continued, and the flicker of hope was instantly extinguished. "We have a problem." She finally put the tablet down and folded her hands on the table. She was giving him her full attention now, and it was terrifying. "You see, Mr. Barrett, Lumina Innovations is not just a tech company. We are a company built on a philosophical principle that the character of the people you work with is as important as the quality of the work they produce." Dr. Patterson, Alexander, began his voice, a strangled whisper about yesterday. She held up a hand, and he fell silent. "Yesterday, in the Diamond Lounge at JFK, I was conducting a small informal test. It's something I do sometimes when considering a major new partnership. I observe the key players in an uncontrolled environment. I want to see who they are when they think no one of consequence is watching. It's often far more revealing than a dozen boardroom meetings." Alexander's blood ran cold. A test. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate evaluation, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. "You, Mr. Barrett," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational level, "didn't just fail that test." She paused, each word precise and measured. "You showed arrogance, prejudice, contempt, everything we stand against." She leaned forward slightly. "You looked at me, and you saw a problem, an inconvenience, an object to be removed from your sight so you could enjoy your expensive whiskey in peace. You didn't see a person. You didn't see a fellow traveler. And you certainly didn't see the founder and CEO of the company you are desperately trying to get into business with." Alexander opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but no words came out. He was paralyzed. "The question I have to ask myself is," she continued, "if that is how you treat a stranger you perceive to be beneath you, how will you treat my employees? How will you treat our junior partners? How will you represent our shared values in the world?" She paused, letting the questions hang in the air like poisoned darts. The answer she said, answering her own question, is that you won't. Because this meeting is over. There will be no partnership between Lumina Innovations and Monarch Global Ventures. Not now, not ever. The finality in Dr. Patterson's voice was absolute. It wasn't the angry pronouncement of a woman seeking revenge. It was the calm, rational conclusion of a scientist who had analyzed the data and found it fatally flawed. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Alexander Barrett's career. He finally found his voice, a desperate croaking sound that was a pathetic imitation of his usual commanding tone. Dr. Patterson, Maya, please. I am so profoundly sorry. What I said, what I did, it was inexcusable. A momentary lapse in judgment. The stress of the deal, the travel. It's no excuse. I know, but... She held up a single elegant hand, and he fell silent. Mr. Barrett, let's be very clear, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except a chilling clarity. This wasn't a momentary lapse. A lapse is forgetting an anniversary or misspeaking in a meeting. What you displayed was not a lapse. It was a revelation. You revealed your core programming. She looked directly into his eyes, holding him in place with the intensity of her gaze. In that moment, under the mildest of perceived provocations, you defaulted to your factory settings. Arrogance, prejudice, and contempt. She gestured around the vast sunlit room. This company, this campus, it was built by people you would likely dismiss. People from every background, every race, every country. The woman who designed our primary quantum encryption algorithm is a black woman from rural Georgia. The man who revolutionized our cooling systems is a first-generation immigrant from Vietnam. They are brilliant. They are dedicated. And I will not under any circumstances subject them to a partner who would look at them and see anything less than exactly who they are, the best at what they do. Alexander felt the walls of the glass kingdom closing in on him. He was suffocating. He had walked into this room a titan of industry. He was being reduced to a case study in bigotry. It wasn't about the athleisure wear, was it? She continued, her eyes searching his demanding honesty. It was about who was wearing it. You saw a black woman in a space you felt belonged to. You, and your immediate instinctual reaction, was to believe she didn't belong. You didn't consider for a second that she might have earned her place there just as you had. In fact, it never occurred to you she might have built the place. He could only shake his head, a broken man. I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. I can change. Let me prove it. The deal is too important for both our companies. She offered a sad, small smile. The deal is important, but it's not more important than our principles. Lumina is successful precisely because we put our principles first. We have turned down more lucrative deals than this one for lesser reasons. A partnership with you, with your company being represented by you, would be a betrayal of every single employee who trusts me to create a safe and respectful environment for them. It would tell them that money is more important than their dignity. And it is not. She stood up, the silent signal that the audience was over. Your proposal was excellent. She repeated, a final cutting piece of professional courtesy. I will be sending a note to your CEO, Nicholas Thompson, commending the work of your analysts and strategists. I will also be informing him in no uncertain terms why the deal is being terminated. I believe in transparency. The implication was horrifyingly clear. She wasn't just rejecting the deal. She was going to tell his boss exactly why. She was going to hand Nicholas Thompson the weapon with which to execute him. Please, he whispered, the last vestiges of his pride crumbling into dust. Don't. It will ruin me. Doctor, Maya Patterson walked to the panoramic window and looked out at the mountains. Your actions have consequences, Mr. Barrett. You are a man who clearly believes in a world of hierarchy of levels of insiders and outsiders. You are about to experience a profound lesson in the fact that character is the one true currency, and yours, I am afraid, is bankrupt." She turned back to him, her expression no longer clinical, but filled with a deep, weary sorrow. "You did this to yourself. You built your own cage. You insulted the locksmith, and now you find yourself trapped inside. I take no joy in this, but I will not shrink from the decision that your behavior has forced me to make." She pressed a small button on the conference table. A moment later, Diego, the campus ambassador, entered the room, his smile as bright and oblivious as before. "Diego," Dr. Patterson said, her voice returning to a tone of calm authority, "Mr. Barrett is finished. Please escort him back to the lobby." Alexander sat paralyzed as Diego gestured politely toward the door. He couldn't move. It was as if his entire nervous system had shut down. "Mr. Barrett," Diego prompted gently, his usual animation subdued. Slowly, shakily, Alexander pushed himself to his feet. His knees threatened to buckle. Sweat trickled down his spine. His designer suit suddenly felt like a costume, a ridiculous, expensive disguise that had failed to conceal his true self. He didn't look at Dr. Patterson again. He couldn't. He had never felt so thoroughly and completely dismantled in his entire life. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't sworn. She had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had destroyed him. As he walked out of the boardroom, a ghost in a Tom Ford suit, he knew he wasn't just leaving a meeting. He was leaving behind his career, his reputation, and the entire gilded world he had once so confidently commanded. The door to the glass kingdom swung shut behind him, and he was cast out into the wilderness. The walk back through the serene, sun-dappled corridors of Lumina Innovations was a blur of exquisite torture for Alexander. Every smiling employee he passed, every quiet hub of collaboration he glimpsed, was a testament to the world he had just been ejected from. Diego kept up a cheerful stream of chatter about the campus's LEED Platinum certification and its farm-to-table cafeteria, but Alexander heard none of it. He was trapped in the echoing silence of the boardroom, Dr. Patterson's final words replaying in his mind. "Character is the one true currency, and yours, I am afraid, is bankrupt." When he finally stepped out of the building into the warm California sun, it felt cold and alien. The black town car was waiting for him, a hearse for his professional life. He slumped into the back seat, ignoring the driver's pleasant greeting. He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling. He had to call his CEO, Nicholas Thompson. He had to get ahead of this, to spin it, to craft some narrative where this was a misunderstanding, where Dr. Patterson was being unreasonable. But before he could dial, his phone buzzed violently in his hand. The caller ID was Nicholas Thompson. She was fast. Of course she was fast. Efficiency was her brand. He took a deep breath, trying to summon a shred of the authority he once wielded. He answered the call. "Nicholas," he began, attempting a tone of weary frustration. "Listen, we have a problem. This Patterson woman is—" "Shut up, Alexander." Nicholas's voice cut through the line, cold as a glacier. There was no preamble, no greeting, just pure, unadulterated fury. "Just shut your mouth for 1 second and listen. I just got off a call with Dr. Maya Patterson of Lumina Innovations. Do you know who that is?" "Alexander, I can explain." "No, you can't," Nicholas roared, and Alexander could picture him in his corner office overlooking Manhattan, his face purple with rage. "What you can do is listen. She told me everything, and I mean everything. She told me about the lounge. She told me about your comments. She used the phrase, a staggering lack of perception and a deep-seated arrogance. Does that sound familiar to you, you idiot? Alexander was silent. The phone pressed hard against his ear. We have spent 2 years and $7 million in man-hours and research trying to land this deal. Alexander, 2 years. It was the key to our entire West Coast expansion. It was our future. And you blew it up. You didn't lose it in a negotiation. You weren't outmaneuvered. You incinerated a $50 billion opportunity because you didn't like a woman's tracksuit. The venom in Nicholas's voice was unlike anything Alexander had ever heard. This wasn't just a boss dressing down an employee. This was personal. This was betrayal. Nicholas, please, it was a mistake. A mistake. A mistake is a typo in a memo, Alexander. This was self-immolation. And you didn't just burn yourself. You tried to burn the whole damn company down with you. Dr. Patterson commended your team's proposal. She made it crystal clear that the deal was perfect. The only flaw, the single point of failure, was you. She said, and I quote, "His character is a strategic liability. We are unwilling to underwrite." The phrase hit Alexander like a physical blow. A strategic liability. In his world, there was no greater condemnation. So here's what's going to happen. Nicholas continued, his voice now dangerously calm. Your corporate accounts are being frozen as we speak. Your security access to the building is revoked. A courier is on his way to your apartment to collect your company property. Don't bother flying back to New York. Just have your things cleared out of your office by the end of the day. You are fired, Alexander. Effective immediately. Fired. Alexander choked out the word. It felt foreign, absurd. It was something that happened to other people. Is that word confusing to you? Nicholas sneered. Let me be clearer. Your employment with Monarch Global Ventures is terminated. For cause gross misconduct, a flagrant violation of our company's code of conduct. You're a pariah, Alexander. By the time I hang up this phone, every headhunter in the industry will know what you did. You didn't just lose a job today, you lost a career. Alexander could hear the click of Nicholas hanging up. The line went dead. Alexander sat there in the back of the town car, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. He was adrift, stripped of his title, his access, his very identity. Yesterday he was Alexander Barrett, Executive VP of Acquisitions, a master of the universe. Today, he was just a man in an expensive suit. He no longer had the salary to afford. Sitting in a car he could no longer expense. He finally lowered the phone and looked out the window. They were on the highway heading back toward the airport. He saw a plane taking off, climbing steeply into the sky. He wondered if it was her G700, ascending effortlessly, leaving him and his ruined life far below. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Everything okay, sir? Alexander couldn't answer. He just stared at his reflection in the polished glass of his phone screen, the face of a man who had it all and threw it away, because he couldn't stand the sight of a successful black woman in a comfortable pair of pants. The hard karma had not just hit back. It had pulverized him. The journey back to the airport was a slow, agonizing crawl through the wreckage of his life. Every notification on Alexander's phone was another blow. An email from HR confirming his termination. A notification from American Express that his corporate card had been suspended. A text from his secretary, a woman he had treated with casual disdain for years, saying simply, "I'm sorry to hear what happened. They're packing up your office now." He arrived at San Francisco International Airport, a hollowed-out man. He walked to the Delta check-in counter, his once prized calfskin briefcase, now feeling like a ridiculously heavy burden. "I need to change my flight back to New York," he told the agent, his voice raspy. "I was on a later flight, but I need to leave as soon as possible." The agent tapped at her keyboard. her acrylic nails clicking like tiny hammers on his psyche. "Okay, Mr. Barrett, I see your original booking first class. We do have a flight leaving in 90 minutes. However, there are no first-class seats available. I can put you in a middle seat in Economy Plus or a window seat in the main cabin." Economy. A middle seat. The words were so alien to him. It was the world he had paid so much to avoid, the world he had looked down upon from the sanctuary of his lounges and premium cabins. "And sir," the agent added, her expression apologetic, "I see this ticket was booked with a corporate card that has been declined. You'll need to provide a different form of payment for the change fee and any fare difference." Of course. He fumbled in his wallet for his personal credit card, the one he hadn't used in years. The transaction went through a small, humiliating beep, sealing his downgrade. He took his new boarding pass. Seat 28B. He was no longer a name, just a number, and a letter wedged between two strangers. With hours to kill before his flight, he wandered aimlessly through the terminal. He couldn't go to the Diamond Lounge. His card wouldn't work. He was one of them now, one of the masses he had so despised. He found a seat at a crowded gate, the air thick with the smell of Cinnabon and stress. A baby was crying nearby. A group of teenagers were laughing, watching videos on their phones, with the volume turned up. It was the exact scene he had built his entire life around escaping. He looked around at the faces. People of all races, all ages, all dressed in a myriad of ways. Some in suits, some in shorts, some in athleisure sets. They were all just people going somewhere. For the first time he saw them, not as a chaotic mob, but as individuals. A father patiently explaining something to his young son, a young woman studying for an exam, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then his eyes landed on a black woman sitting across from him. She was wearing a simple hoodie and leggings, reading a book on a Kindle. She looked up, caught his eye for a second, and gave him a small, polite smile before returning to her reading. A week ago, he would have looked at her and seen nothing. Or worse, he would have judged her. Now all he could see was the ghost of Dr. Maya Patterson. He saw the potential for brilliance, for power, for a whole universe of achievement that he, in his blind arrogance, had been completely incapable of perceiving. His prejudice hadn't just been a moral failing. It had been a failure of intelligence. It had made him stupid. It had made him blind to reality. He thought he was assessing the world, but he was only ever seeing a distorted reflection of his own ugly biases. Was this who he really was? A man so small he couldn't recognize greatness unless it wore the uniform he prescribed. The boarding call for his flight to New York began. The scrum of people lining up, the jostling for position. It was his new reality. As he shuffled forward in the line, a man in an expensive-looking suit pushed past him, muttering, "Excuse me," with an air of immense self-importance. Alexander saw himself in that man. He saw the arrogance, the entitlement, the utter obliviousness. "Is that how I've been?" He wondered, a sinking feeling in his gut. "Is that how everyone saw me?" He finally boarded the plane and found his seat, 28B, squeezed between a large man who immediately fell asleep and started snoring, and a woman who hogged the armrest. As the plane took off, he pressed his head against the slice of window he could see past the person next to him. He looked down at Silicon Valley, the landscape of glass kingdoms and limitless innovation shrinking beneath him. He had flown out here to conquer it. He was flying home a pariah, banished from that world forever. He had no job, no prospects, and a reputation that was now radioactive. He had nothing left but a long, uncomfortable flight home and a future as empty as the sky outside. The karma hadn't just been hard. It had been absolute. It had taken everything, leaving him with only the crushing weight of his own monumental self-inflicted failure. His once precious briefcase sat untouched at his feet. Worthless leather. Worthless man. But perhaps not beyond redemption. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin lights were dimmed as passengers settled into the rhythm of transcontinental travel. Most had their faces illuminated by the blue glow of seatback entertainment screens. Some slept. Others worked quietly on laptops. Alexander Barrett sat in the darkness of seat 28B, trapped in his thoughts. His neck ached from the awkward angle. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him. The man beside him had encroached further into his space, his large frame spilling over the inadequate armrest. The recycled air tasted stale. A crying baby 3 rows back pierced through the dull roar of engines. His shoulder bumped against his neighbor's every time either of them moved. The fabric of the seat was rough against his palm, nothing like the buttery leather he was accustomed to. This physical discomfort was new to him. For years he had flown in the spacious pods of first class, insulated from the realities of economy travel. Now, he was experiencing the actual conditions endured by those he had dismissed as people who simply hadn't worked hard enough to earn better. The flight attendant passed with the beverage cart. "Something to drink, Sir Scotch," he said automatically. "Mac." He stopped himself. "Whatever you have." "That'll be $9, she said pleasantly, reaching for the credit card reader. A small plastic bottle gleamed under the overhead light. Not aged single malt, just mass-produced blend. Another shock. In first class, premium liquor flowed freely. Here you paid for a miniature bottle of mediocre whiskey. He handed over his personal credit card, watching as she swiped it for a transaction that once would have seemed beneath his notice. Now, it was a deliberate choice to spend $9 of his rapidly dwindling personal funds. The whiskey, not Macallan 25, but some generic blend, burned his throat without offering any comfort. The plastic cup felt flimsy between his fingers, a far cry from the crystal tumblers of the Diamond Lounge. The ice cubes were smaller, melting faster, diluting the already weak spirit. He stared at the small plastic cup, remembering how just 24 hours earlier he had been sipping aged single malt from crystal glassware, feeling like a king holding court. The memory of his conversation with Dr. Patterson replayed in his mind for the 100th time. "Character is the one true currency, and yours, I am afraid, is bankrupt." The words cut deeper with each repetition. He had always defined himself by external markers: his title, his salary, his possessions. He had believed his worth was measured by the exclusivity of the spaces he occupied. Now wedged between strangers in economy class, what was left of him? "What if I've been wrong about everything?" he wondered, the thought terrifying in its implications. What if success isn't about the height of the walls you build, but the bridges? His phone buzzed with a text message, the short vibration of impending doom. It was from Trevor Mills, his closest friend in the industry and head of private equity at a rival firm. "Alex, what the hell happened with Lumina?" "Hearing wild rumors. Call me." So, it had begun. Word was spreading. By the time he landed in New York, everyone in his professional circle would know of his spectacular fall from grace. He didn't reply. What could he possibly say? "I revealed myself as a bigot and torpedoed a multi-billion-dollar deal. I mistook one of the most powerful women in tech for an interloper in my space. I got exactly what I deserved." None of these were messages he was ready to send, even if they were the truth. The woman on his other side shifted in her seat, accidentally jostling his arm. She muttered a quick, "Sorry," without looking up from her book. Alexander nodded automatically, then realized she hadn't seen his acknowledgement. "It's fine," he said aloud. Probably the first time in years he had responded to such a minor imposition without irritation. Small kindnesses, basic courtesies, these were things he had begun to consider beneath him, unnecessary concessions to people who didn't matter in his world. Now the simple human exchange felt strangely significant. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, shuddering briefly. In first class, such moments were barely noticeable, the premium cabins positioned in the most stable part of the aircraft. Here, in row 28, the bump was pronounced a physical reminder of his new reality. As the plane stabilized, Alexander found himself thinking about what awaited him in New York. His apartment on the Upper East Side, a showcase of wealth rather than a home. His social circle people, who valued him for his title and connections. His possessions, carefully curated symbols of status that now seemed hollow. All of it built on a foundation that had just crumbled beneath him. A strange feeling washed over him. Was it shame? Relief? Both. Perhaps there was freedom in having his facade stripped away. Perhaps for the first time in decades, he could see himself clearly. The San Francisco Chronicle lay folded on the empty seat beside a businessman at gate C10. The headline caught Alexander's eye. Lumina Innovations announces major ethical AI initiative. The layover in Chicago had given him 3 hours to kill before his connecting flight to New York. His original direct flight, the one booked under his now canceled corporate account, had probably already landed at JFK. He picked up the abandoned newspaper, scanning the article. It was a profile of Dr. Maya Patterson and her company's commitment to developing AI with built-in ethical constraints. There was a photo of her standing in front of the Lumina campus, looking exactly as she had in the lounge, composed, intelligent, unassuming in her authority. Integrity isn't just a corporate value at Lumina. It's our operating system, she was quoted as saying. We believe that ethical frameworks must be baked into the technology from the ground up, not added as an afterthought. Alexander stared at the words, seeing them now through new eyes. Yesterday, he might have dismissed such talk as PR fluff. Today, he understood it was the genuine philosophy of a woman who lived her principles, who had just demonstrated exactly how seriously she took them, by walking away from billions over a matter of character. He set the paper down, his gaze drifting across the crowded terminal. O'Hare's C concourse was packed with travelers from all walks of life, business people in suits, families with young children, college students with backpacks, elderly couples holding hands. The scent of airport coffee mingled with perfumed disinfectant and the unmistakable odor of hundreds of people in transit. Announcements echoed off the high ceilings. Footsteps clattered on polished floors. A symphony of humanity he'd never bothered to hear. A black woman in a professional pantsuit walked by, trailing a carry-on behind her. She was speaking authoritatively into her phone about quarterly projections and market expansions. Alexander watched her pass, wondering about her story, her company, her life questions that would never have occurred to him before. How many Dr. Maya Pattersons had he encountered and dismissed over the years? How many brilliant minds had he failed to recognize because they didn't fit his narrow conception of what success looked like? The questions were uncomfortable, but he couldn't escape them. Across from him, a white man in an expensive suit was berating a young Hispanic gate agent. "This is unacceptable," the man was saying, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea who I am? I need to be on that flight." The agent maintained a professional demeanor, but Alexander could see the tension in her shoulders, the practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile Carmen at the Diamond Lounge had given him just yesterday when he'd ordered his Macallan without looking at her. The scene was like looking into a mirror, a reflection of the man he had been just 24 hours ago. Entitled, demanding, oblivious to the humanity of the person on the receiving end of his condescension. "Sir, I understand your frustration," the gate agent was saying, "but the flight is fully boarded. The doors are closed. We cannot—" "This is your job," the man interrupted. "Make it happen. I'm not asking, I'm telling you." Something shifted in Alexander. Before he knew what he was doing, he was on his feet walking toward the confrontation. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the man in the suit. The flight's closed. She can't change that. No one can. The man turned to him, surprise giving way to annoyance. This doesn't concern you. Maybe not. Alexander agreed. But taking it out on her won't get you on that plane. Trust me. I just learned that lesson the hard way. The man stared at him, thrown off balance by this unexpected intervention. There's another flight in an hour, the gate agent offered, seizing the moment. I can confirm you on that one in first class. The man's anger deflated slightly. He gave Alexander a look, part confusion, part lingering hostility, before turning back to the agent. Fine. Book it. As the man moved to the counter to complete his rebooking, the gate agent caught Alexander's eye and mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded, surprised by the small swell of something in his chest. It wasn't pride exactly, just the unfamiliar feeling of having done the right thing for its own sake. He returned to his seat, processing what had just happened. He had intervened not because it benefited him, not because there was anything to gain, but simply because he recognized the injustice of the situation. He had seen himself in that angry man and had chosen in that small moment to be something different. Was this growth, or just the desperate grasping of a drowning man? The PA system crackled. American Airlines Flight TWI 187 to New York. LaGuardia is now boarding Zone 5. Alexander gathered his things, the calfskin briefcase that no longer seemed to matter, the phone that no longer connected him to power. As he joined the boarding line, he found himself standing behind a young black woman who looked to be in her early 20s. She was wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt, headphones around her neck. Columbia, he asked, noticing the logo on her sweatshirt. She looked up, surprised. Yeah, finishing my PhD in computer science. A day ago, Alexander would have immediately categorized her diversity admission, affirmative action, not truly belonging in an Ivy League institution. Today he wondered what breakthroughs she might be working on, what companies she might found, what futures she might create. Impressive, he said, and meant it. Specializing in anything particular? Quantum neural networks, she replied, a hint of wariness in her eyes. She was used to explaining herself, to proving she belonged. Like Dr. Maya Patterson's work, Alexander murmured, more to himself than to her. The young woman's eyes widened. You know her research? Most people just know her as the Lumina CEO. I'm learning, he said quietly. I'm learning. Alexander's apartment felt like a stranger's home. The sleek, minimalist furnishings selected by an interior designer he'd barely spoken to offered no comfort. The vast windows overlooking Central Park presented a view he had purchased rather than earned. The sound of his footsteps echoed off marble floors. The leather sofa creaked as he sat down. The crystal decanters on the bar cart clinked softly as a distant siren passed by on Fifth Avenue. The silence pressed in from all sides, emptier than it had ever felt before. It was 11:37 p.m. Eastern Time. He had been awake for nearly 24 hours, but sleep seemed impossible. He dropped his briefcase on the marble counter and poured himself a glass of Macallan from his personal collection, a $900 bottle that suddenly seemed like an obscene indulgence. His phone had been buzzing nonstop since he landed. Text messages, emails, voicemails, all variations on the same theme. What happened? Is it true? Are you okay? News traveled fast in his industry. By now, everyone who mattered in New York finance knew that Alexander Barrett had been terminated from Monarch Global, that the Lumina deal had collapsed spectacularly, that his career was in free fall. He ignored them all, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows instead. The park was a dark expanse below, dotted with the artificial stars of lampposts. The city stretched beyond it, a glittering tapestry of lives and stories he had never bothered to consider. How many of those twinkling lights represented people like Dr. Maya Patterson, brilliant, unassuming people whose worth he would have dismissed based on superficial judgments? His phone rang again. This time, it was his younger sister Kate, the one person who might call out of genuine concern rather than professional rubbernecking. "Alex, are you okay? I just heard from Trevor's wife," she said. "It's true," he interrupted, his voice flat. "All of it. Whatever you heard, it's probably worse." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Do you want to talk about it?" He sank onto his leather sofa, suddenly exhausted to his bones. "I don't even know where to begin." "Begin with what happened," Kate suggested gently. So he did. He told her everything. The lounge, his assumptions, Dr. Patterson's revelation, the meeting, the firing. He didn't sugarcoat his behavior or try to justify it. He simply laid out the facts in their damning clarity. When he finished, there was silence. He waited for her judgment, her disappointment, her disgust. "Alex," she finally said, "do you remember Mrs. Johnson? From 5th grade?" The question was so unexpected that it took him a moment to place the reference. "The substitute teacher. The one who thought I cheated on the math test." "Yes. You were furious because she accused you without evidence. You kept saying it wasn't fair to be judged without being given a chance. What does that have to do with—" "And in high school," Kate continued, "when Coach Williams benched you for the championship game, because he thought you weren't taking practice seriously, even though you were staying late every day. You said it was the worst injustice you'd ever experienced." Alexander felt a creeping sense of understanding, and with it, shame. "Kate, you've always had a keen sense of when you were being unfairly judged," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time to extend that same consideration to others." The words landed like a gentle hammer, breaking something open inside him. He had spent his entire career fighting to be seen, to be valued, to not be judged by superficial standards, all while doing exactly that to countless others. "I don't know if I can fix this," he admitted, a rare confession of vulnerability. "Maybe you can't," Kate acknowledged. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to be different going forward, whether anyone ever notices or not." After they hung up, Alexander sat in the darkness of his apartment for a long time. Outside, the city continued its restless dance of light and shadow. Inside, something was shifting, a slow, painful realignment of values that had been distorted for too long. The Alexander Barrett, who had boarded a plane to San Francisco 2 days ago, was gone. The man who returned was still taking shape, his edges undefined, his future uncertain. But for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of something authentic beneath the carefully constructed facade. Something that might, with time and effort, be worth more than all the trappings of success he had lost. He walked to the bar, took the $900 bottle of Macallan, poured it down the sink. Some currencies weren't worth collecting anymore. 3 months later, Dr. Maya Patterson stood at the podium of the Lumina Innovations auditorium. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the company's new initiative, Quantum Access, Breaking Barriers in Tech. The October sunshine streamed through the smart glass ceiling, dappling the audience in gentle light. For too long, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. The technology industry has operated on the assumption that talent looks a certain way, comes from certain places, follows certain paths. Today, we're committing $50 million to prove that assumption wrong. The audience, a mix of employees, press, and industry leaders, listened with rapt attention as she outlined the program Full Scholarships for underrepresented students in STEM fields, mentorship programs in underserved communities, accelerator funding for startups founded by women and people of color. Diversity isn't just a moral imperative, she continued. It's a competitive advantage. Different perspectives lead to different solutions. Different experiences lead to different innovations. By limiting who gets a seat at the table, the tech industry has been limiting its own potential. In the back of the room, Olivia Taylor watched with pride. The program had been in development for months, but its announcement today felt particularly significant. It was in many ways the positive legacy of the Monarch incident, a reaffirmation of Lumina's commitment to judging people by their character and contributions, not by superficial markers. After the presentation, as attendees mingled during the reception, Olivia approached Maya practically bouncing with excitement. "The response is overwhelming," she said, showing Maya her tablet with the social media metrics already climbing. TechCrunch is calling it the most ambitious diversity initiative in Silicon Valley history, and IEEE wants you for their January cover. Can you believe? I mean, it's huge. Maya nodded, pleased but not surprised. It's the right thing to do. And the smart thing. Speaking of smart, Olivia hesitated, fingers drumming rapidly against her tablet. Monarch Global announced their new partnership with Horizon Tech this morning. Apparently, they've completely restructured their leadership team since, well, you know. Thompson really cleaned house after I saw that, Maya acknowledged. Nicholas Thompson made some bold moves. What had happened with Alexander Barrett had sent shockwaves through Monarch Global. Nicholas Thompson, facing the loss of the Lumina deal and the PR fallout, had responded with a sweeping overhaul of the company's culture and practices. New diversity initiatives, mandatory bias training, and a complete restructuring of the acquisitions team. It wasn't just damage control. It was a genuine attempt to transform a toxic culture from the inside out. And Barrett Olivia asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them for months. Maya's expression softened slightly. Last I heard, he's working at a mid-sized firm in Boston, starting over essentially. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Alexander Barrett was sitting in a modest office in Boston's financial district, interviewing a recent MIT graduate for a junior analyst position. The young woman across from him, brilliant, poised, and wearing a hijab, was walking him through her thesis on algorithmic bias in financial models. 3 months ago, he might have made assumptions about her background, her qualifications, her fit within the industry. Today, he was listening, really listening to her ideas. His office was small, with an old wooden desk and a view of brick wall rather than the Manhattan skyline. The autumn rain tapped against the window, a rhythmic counterpoint to their conversation. The leather portfolio on his desk was simple, functional, nothing like the ostentatious briefcase he'd once carried. His new role at Bradford Partners was several steps down from his previous position. Lower salary, less prestige, minimal staff. But it was a chance one that had come after weeks of rejections and closed doors. The firm's founder, an old friend from business school, had been willing to take a chance on him, with conditions: no executive title, a probationary period, and a clear understanding that any hint of the behavior that had ended his career at Monarch would not be tolerated. Alexander had accepted immediately. It wasn't humility, not yet, but it was the beginning of something like wisdom. "Your analysis of credit algorithm biases is fascinating," he told the candidate, genuinely impressed. "How would you apply this thinking to our portfolio review process?" As she answered, articulating a vision both ethical and profitable, Alexander found himself thinking of Dr. Maya Patterson. He wondered if she knew the profound impact she had had on his life, not just by ending his career at Monarch, but by forcing him to confront the person he had become. He would likely never have the opportunity to thank her. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, but he could honor the lessons she had taught him, one decision, one interaction, one day at a time. Back in Silicon Valley, as the quantum access announcement concluded, Maya Patterson slipped away from the crowd to her office. On her desk was the latest issue of Fortune, featuring Lumina Innovations as Company of the Year. But it wasn't the accolade that had captured her attention. It was a small article in the corner of page 72. Former Monarch VP launches diversity initiative at Bradford Partners. The photo showed Alexander Barrett, looking humbler than she remembered him speaking to a group of students at a Boston community college about careers in finance. She studied the image for a moment, her face giving nothing away. Then she turned to her window. Some lessons cost millions to learn, but if they changed even one person, perhaps they were worth it. 6 months after the fateful encounter in the Diamond Lounge, Maya Patterson stood at the center of the Grand Ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. The annual Innovation Summit had selected her as the keynote speaker, an honor that recognized not just Lumina's technological breakthroughs, but its ethical leadership in the industry. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled guests. The scent of lilies and expensive perfume hung in the air. The quiet murmur of the elite of the tech world formed a gentle backdrop to the evening. Outside, January snow fell silently on the Manhattan streets, turning the city into a crystalline wonderland. Technology without humanity is just machinery, she told the audience of industry leaders, investors, and journalists. It's the values we encode into our systems, fairness, accountability, transparency, that transform them from tools into solutions. Her Quantum Access initiative had already produced tangible results. A 40% increase in applications from underrepresented groups, partnerships with 50 community colleges across the country, and a venture fund specifically for founders from non-traditional backgrounds. More importantly, it had sparked similar programs at other tech companies. The industry was beginning to acknowledge, however belatedly, that its homogeneity was a weakness, not a strength. In the audience, Nicholas Thompson of Monarch Global listened attentively. The past 6 months had been transformative for his company as well. After the Lumina debacle, he had brought in outside consultants to assess Monarch's culture. The results had been sobering, a pattern of biased discrimination and toxic leadership that extended far beyond Alexander Barrett. The cleanup had been painful, but necessary. 5 executives had been replaced. New hiring practices had been implemented. Mandatory bias training had been instituted at all levels. And most significantly, Monarch had established its own version of Lumina's character-based assessment for potential partners and employees. After the keynote during the reception, Nicholas approached Maya cautiously. His silver hair was newly cut, his navy suit impeccable, but his posture lacked the aggressive confidence that had once been his trademark. Dr. Patterson, excellent speech. I particularly appreciated your points about ethical leadership. The Q4 metrics you cited on diverse teams outperforming homogeneous ones were quite compelling. She turned, recognizing him immediately. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. There was an awkward pause, the elephant in the room too large to ignore, but too complex to address directly. The clink of champagne glasses and murmur of conversation flowed around them, creating a strange bubble of privacy in the crowded room. Your Quantum Access initiative is remarkable, he said finally. We've been closely following its progress. The educational outreach component is particularly innovative. I noticed Monarch's new inclusion program as well, she acknowledged. Impressive commitment. Nicholas nodded, his expression sober. Sometimes it takes a significant shock to recognize systemic problems. I wish it hadn't happened the way it did, but I'm grateful for the wake-up call. Maya studied him, assessing his sincerity. How is the transformation being received internally? Honestly. Mixed, he admitted. Some resistance from the old guard, enthusiasm from younger employees. But the proof is in the results. Our recruitment pool is more diverse than ever. And our newest product teams are producing more innovative solutions. She nodded, unsurprised. Change is never easy. But necessary change is always worth the discomfort. As they continued their conversation, tentative at first, then increasingly engaged, they were unaware of being observed from across the room. Alexander Barrett stood near the bar, a glass of sparkling water in hand. He was not attending the summit as a participant, but as the +1 of his sister Kate, a technology journalist covering the event. It had taken considerable courage to accompany her, knowing he might encounter former colleagues, or worse, Dr. Patterson herself. His suit was off the rack now, his watch a simple Seiko. The Italian briefcase was gone, replaced by a practical messenger bag. But the most striking change wasn't in his attire. It was in his eyes. The arrogance had been replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. The winter had thinned his face, adding lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Seeing Maya now deep in conversation with Nicholas Thompson sent a complex wave of emotions through him: shame, regret, but also a strange sense of gratitude. The past 6 months had been a journey through professional purgatory. After his dismissal from Monarch, he had faced not just unemployment, but unemployability in his former circles. His name had become toxic in the industry, his reputation destroyed. The position at Bradford Partners had been a lifeline thrown not out of charity, but out of a long-standing debt. Jonathan Bradford had been a struggling student at Wharton, when Alexander, then a teaching assistant, had spent hours helping him master financial models. That long-ago kindness, one of the few genuine ones in Alexander's career, had returned to him when he needed it most. His new role was humble by his former standards. His salary was less than a third of what he had earned at Monarch. His office was a cramped space with a view of a brick wall, rather than a corner suite overlooking Manhattan. But there was dignity in the work, and increasingly purpose. Under Jonathan's mentorship, Alexander was learning to measure success differently, not by deals closed or bonuses earned, but by value-created relationships, built, potential, nurtured. He had started volunteering at a weekend program, teaching financial literacy to high school students in underserved Boston neighborhoods. Initially undertaken as a form of penance, it had become the most rewarding part of his week. The students' faces, when they grasped a concept, their genuine excitement about planning for futures they could now envision, gave him a satisfaction his bonuses never had. "Is that her?" Kate asked, appearing at his side and following his gaze to where Maya stood. Alexander nodded. "Dr. Patterson, and my former boss." Kate studied them, then him. "Do you want to say hello?" "No," he said quickly. "No, that wouldn't be appropriate. Some debts couldn't be paid in person. Some lessons were best honored through changed behavior rather than attempted apologies." Across the room, Maya happened to glance in his direction. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. No smile passed between them. No nod of acknowledgement. Just a look of recognition of what had happened, of what had changed. Then she returned to her conversation, leaving Alexander standing with the strange sense that a circle had somehow closed, not with forgiveness, but with something like completion. As the Innovation Summit concluded the following day, attendees dispersed throughout the city. Maya, with a rare free afternoon before her flight back to California, decided to visit the Museum of Modern Art, a small indulgence that her packed schedule rarely permitted. In the contemplative quiet of the museum's contemporary wing, surrounded by expressions of human creativity and vision, she found herself reflecting on the past year. Lumina was thriving. The Quantum Access Initiative was exceeding expectations, and the company's latest breakthrough in ethical AI had positioned it at the forefront of the industry. The soft museum lighting illuminated masterworks in gentle gold. The hushed atmosphere created a cocoon of contemplation. The faint scent of polish and paper reminded her of university libraries, places where ideas flourished. Yet success had never been her primary motivation. Purpose was. The question that drove her wasn't, "How can I win?" but "How can I contribute?" Not "How can I rise?" but "How can I lift others as I climb?" In a world that often confused wealth with worth and status with significance, she had built a different model, one based on the radical proposition that character mattered more than credentials, that how you treated people was as important as what you achieved. As she stood before a Rothko painting, absorbing its luminous layers of color, she sensed someone enter the gallery behind her. She didn't turn her attention fixed on the artwork, but she was aware of the person stopping several feet away, similarly engaged in contemplation. Several minutes passed in shared silence before she finally turned to leave. As she did, she found herself facing Alexander Barrett. He looked different, thinner, less polished, somehow more substantial, despite the physical diminishment. His suit was off the rack, rather than bespoke, his watch, modest, rather than ostentatious. But the most striking change was in his eyes, clearer, steadier, unburdened by the constant calculation of advantage. They stood for a moment, the unexpected encounter, rendering both momentarily speechless. The hushed gallery seemed to hold its breath. A distant siren wailed outside, muffled by thick museum walls. "Dr. Patterson," he finally said, his voice quiet in the hushed gallery. "Mr. Barrett," she acknowledged. Neither moved to close the distance between them. Some gulfs were too wide for casual bridging. "I'm sorry to disturb your afternoon," he said. "I didn't expect—" "It's a public museum," she replied, her tone neutral. He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuff. "I've been following the Quantum Access program. It's revolutionary. Exactly what the industry needs. Thank you." She studied him, curious, despite herself. "I understand you're in Boston now." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, that she would know this, that she would acknowledge it. "Yes. A small firm. Different work than before." "Better work?" She asked the question, escaping before she could reconsider it. A complex emotion passed through his eyes, something like relief mixed with resolve. "More honest work," he said finally. "Work I can be proud of, not just successful at." She nodded, understanding the distinction. It was one she had built her life around. "I won't keep you," he said, preparing to step aside. Then, with visible effort, "I never properly apologized. For the lounge. For everything." "No," she agreed, "you didn't." He accepted this truth without defensiveness. "I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know, it changed me. You changed me, and I'm grateful, even though that gratitude comes with shame." Maya considered his words, weighing their sincerity against her own principles. "Change is its own apology, Mr. Barrett, more meaningful than words." "I'm trying," he said simply. "That's all any of us can do," she replied. Then, with the faintest softening of her expression, "Good luck with your students. Teaching financial literacy is valuable work." His surprise at her knowledge of his volunteer efforts was evident, but he didn't question it. He simply nodded his thanks. As she moved past him toward the exit, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the silver money clip he'd once used to hold $100 bills. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it on a nearby bench. The gesture wasn't for her benefit. She had already passed. It was for himself, a small symbolic abandonment of who he had been. Outside the museum, Maya paused on the steps, looking out at the bustling city street. A fresh snowfall had blanketed the city during her time inside, transforming the urban landscape into something softer, more forgiving. The winter sun broke through clouds, casting long shadows across Central Park. Her encounter with Alexander Barrett had been neither dramatic nor emotional. There had been no tearful apology, no grand moment of redemption. Just two people acknowledging a shared history and the separate paths that had followed from it. It was in its way the perfect resolution, understated, honest, forward-looking, rather than dwelling in the past. The incident in the Diamond Lounge had never been about Alexander Barrett personally. It had been about principles, about standing firm on the values that defined her and her company. Those principles remained unchanged. But seeing the genuine transformation in the man whose arrogance had once revealed so much about the biases embedded in their industry gave her hope that real change was possible, not just in policies and programs, but in hearts and minds. As her car arrived to take her to the airport, Maya took one last look at the museum. Transformation wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it happened slowly, painting by painting, gallery by gallery, choice by choice. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, you got to witness it firsthand. The true measure of her success wasn't in the billions her company was worth or the awards on her office wall. It was in moments like this, seeing the ripples of positive change, spreading outward, touching lives she might never know about, creating possibilities that would outlast her. It was a different kind of legacy, a better one. And as her plane lifted off from JFK that evening, carrying her back to the company and the future she was building, Maya Patterson felt a quiet certainty that it was worth every moment of the journey. This powerful story shows us that our character is truly the only currency that matters in the end. In a world obsessed with status and appearance, it's how we treat others that defines who we really are. Alexander Barrett learned this lesson the hard way, but his journey reminds us that transformation is possible for anyone willing to face their own prejudices. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages about integrity, respect, and the consequences of our actions. Share this video with someone who might benefit from this powerful lesson about judging others by their character rather than their appearance. Remember, true success isn't measured by the exclusivity of the spaces we occupy, but by the inclusivity of the world we help create. Thank you for watching.